Hey everyone, today I would like to paint this mountain scene with you. It's a great beginning piece where we're only going to use 4 colors and 1, maybe 2 brushes. The hardest part is going to be the reflection, and I promise it doesn't have to be perfectly symmetrical. Let's talk paint. We're going to need black for our deepest shadows. We're going to need turquoise blue for the sky and its reflection. We're going to be using white in most of our mixes, and then Prussian blue will be your main mountain color. A 1/2 inch angle shader will be my primary brush for most of the piece. And then for those that want to get a little bit more detailed, feel free to get a round brush with a fine tip. This will help with some of the highest highlights and water details. You'll also need some clean water, something to dry your brushes with. You'll need a palette, and of course, paper. I'm using an 8" by 8" piece taped down to 6 by 6. It is a cold pressed watercolor paper, 320 GSM. Let's start by drawing a horizon line. This line is also going to be the line over which your mountains reflect. I placed my line a little bit above the halfway point on the page. To start this piece, we are going to need our white, our turquoise or primary blue, and our Prussian blue. Go ahead and add some of each of these colors to your palette. You'll notice I add a little bit more white than the other colors, and that's because we're going to need a lot of it. Also grab that 1/2 inch angle shader and get it wet. We're going to start with our white and add a little bit of that turquoise or primary blue color. Remember, it's easy to add a little bit of the blue at a time, but once you've got it really dark, you'll need a lot more white to get it to a light color. So be sparing in how much blue you add at each moment. I add a little bit of the Prussian blue to help dull the turquoise color a little bit. This is personal choice. Feel free to leave it as bright as you want. We're going to start by using our brightest, bluest color at the very top and very bottom of the piece. From the beginning of this piece onward, let's get in the mindset of anything we do to the top, we're going to do to the reflected side on the bottom. Now that we have our brightest, bluest sky, add more white. We want to work our way toward a lighter sky so that the mountains have a higher contrast with the sky behind them. You'll notice I'm just fussing at the edge of these clouds. I'm just trying to get some organic cloud texture. I'm not going for picturesque shaped clouds. Let's take that same light color and create the reflected portion on the bottom half. I'm going to keep reminding you, but please don't worry too much about it being symmetrical. You'll end up spending a lot of time on this piece and getting frustrated because you may not have a lot of practice getting things perfectly symmetrical. I know I don't. You'll be surprised how the suggestion of symmetry can trick the eye into thinking it's way more symmetrical than it really is, and that is the beauty of doing this piece. So let's add even more white to our mix and complete our sky. You may find yourself wondering, why are we painting the entire page? I know mountains are going to be covering a considerable portion of it. Well, the reason is twofold. One, it is easier to place gouache on paper when there's already a layer of gouache. Trust me, if you run a little test on paper on the side, you'll notice very quickly. The second is if we have that underlayer, when we mix the paint on top with that underlayer, you'll end up getting some cool organic shades as well as have paint that shows through, rather than showing through to bare paper and showing more texture and it just looking like there's not enough paint there. I'm going to scrub a little bit more white texture into the sky, give it a tiny bit more brightness. You can take a damp, clean brush and soften some of those new edges that we just put in. we still want that free look to our clouds. One thing that I have not mentioned yet is you're gonna wanna let your layers dry before you paint on top of them. Now it's time for some fun mountains. Let's mix Prussian blue and white. Leave out the turquoise color altogether. We're going for a decently dark but still misty color that's gonna come through in that white. Now take your brush and draw the rough outline of a mountain. You'll notice that I got too much pigment on the tip of my brush and I didn't mix it in, so I'm having to fix that on the page real quick. I'm leaving this in so you can see that just because you get a scrubbed up line or a little bit too much pigment, gouache is forgiving. Just go ahead and correct it on the paper. You can mix a little bit, you can soften edges. It's easiest to work with before it dries, but you have this freedom. Work toward that rough skyline, and this is going to be the backbone of your piece. And we're going to scrub out that color down toward the horizon line. We want to make sure that we don't end it too soon before we put the next layer of mountains in front of it. Now, do not let this part stress you out, even though you may want to. We are going to draw a roughly symmetrical mountain in the reflection on the other side of the page. Something about the mountains feel more finite than the clouds because clouds are more free and we didn't get too harsh with the lineage and specific shapes. But with the mountains, just think of your peaks and valleys and get them roughly in the same place. The rest does not matter. Trust me on this one. Make sure you drag out that color again toward your horizon line. Now you're moving upward. Go ahead and add some white to your mixture. We're going to use this to brighten the area between the mountains we're doing now and the mountains in front of them. In the areas where there's no shadow, we want the contrast to be high between our next layer of mountains. Now we're going to let this first layer of mountains dry. One thing that's hard to get used to with gouache is light colors dry darker and dark colors dry lighter. Now let's add a little black to the palette. We get to do the fun part of adding shadows and highlights to these mountains and really bring them to life. I want you to pick which side of the page the sun is coming from. I'm going to go from the right-hand side. So as a general rule of thumb, I'll have my shadows on the left of the peaks on my mountain and the highlights on the right. Now, if you're looking at a picture of a mountain, you'll see that there are spots that break these rules of thumb. You'll see shadows where you may not expect it embedded in the highlights and vice versa. So we can be really free with this. I'm going to scrub generally with the rule of thumb and then pocket some shadows wherever I feel like it. Now we get to go do the same thing on the reflection while we have this color mixed. It's easier while you have the color on your palette than doing the highlights and then coming back and trying to get that dark color again. Invariably, something is going to be different about it, which honestly is okay. The variation is great. The reflection distorts the image in a lot of cases anyway. But trust me, let's just do the shadow at the same time so it's easier on our mixing requirements. Just squint and try to get it roughly the same shape. Just as I said before, don't let it stress you out too much or be too perfect. Now get a bunch of that white and add it to your mix. Personally, I find it easiest when you're trying to brighten a color you already have to mix it right next to it. So you're only using a small portion of the original mix and then brightening it with a lot more of that white. The other benefit is you actually have leftover paint of your colors so that you can go back if you have little portions of shadow or highlights that you want to touch up with that leftover paint. Now we're going to scrub some rough light patches. Notice that this color looks white, but it is definitely blue. We're going to come in with some more pure white highlights at the very end, and then you'll notice it really pop. You'll notice that a lot of my brush strokes have this rough texture. That is a dry brushing technique. I really like it for subjects like this because mountains have a lot of texture to them. And rather than me try to use a liner brush or fine point brush to get all of that texture, just making sure your brush doesn't have a ton of water on it will let you create this really beautiful, rough texture. I highly recommend limiting the amount of water you're using while you're creating these mountain shadows and highlights. Remember, if you get a little extra highlight or shadow on the reflection portion, just go ahead and jump up to the top mountain and add it up there. No problem. After I let this dry, I realized it's not quite popping as much as I want. So I'm going to create another layer of white with just a little bit of blue in it. As a general principle, the lighter your highlights get, the smaller portion you want them on the piece. Now we're getting to that almost pure white snow, so it's only going to appear at the highest peaks on this mountain. And it's that layering effect that gives you the suggestion of a lot more detailing than we're truly doing here. So with this highlight color, let's use it sparingly. I'm going to keep most of this highlight on the portion that was already highlighted by our last layer, with maybe a few sporadic marks to show peaks that aren't where you would expect them. Now let's mix a dark mixture of Prussian blue and black. We don't want it pure black. That's going to be our final layer in front. It's going to be close to the color we already have in shadow, which you might wonder, how is it going to contrast and show that it's in front of the shadow color? But it's mostly going to be suggested through it overlapping with our highlighted portions of that medium blue all the way up to that brightest white color. We want to drag down this dark color close to the horizon so that when we put in our final layer of mountain, that it overlaps fully. Again, not to beleaguer the point, but remember your peaks and valleys. Draw roughly the same shape on the other side of the reflection. Now use that same color, mix in a little bit of white, and we have our highlight for these mountains. Follow the same general rule that you did with the mountains in the back. The highlights are going to stick toward the right side of the peaks, and we'll leave that darker color on the left side in our most shadowed regions. Now add even more white to get an even higher highlight. Make sure that this highlight is not as white as the highlight in the back. The goal here is to get somewhere around that middle blue color of the back mountains to show that the light is not hitting these mountains nearly as much. It's in the shadow of the mountains in the background. So as you can see, on this range, it really does look quite highlighted compared to the other two colors. But if you compare it to the mountains in the background, it's only hitting the middlemost color and not nearly as much sun is being seen. Now it's time for that almost pure black. Mix black with Prussian blue. For all intents and purposes, it's going to look black, but trust me, there is a difference between pure black and the little bit of Prussian blue mixed in will make it more cohesive with the rest of the mountains behind it. that Prussian blue color will come through to the eye. So I drew a straight line across the horizon first. Then on the right-hand side, I'm going to bring that mountain up past the mountains in that middle ground area. And on the left-hand side, I'm going to stop it just short of those mountains. This adds some visual interest because on one side, you're only seeing the farthest and nearest mountain, and on the other side, you're seeing all three. Now we get to do one of my favorite parts. Let's take that same dark color, get a round brush with a pointy tip. We're just going to flick the brush in a vertical motion, making little strokes. And it's going to make it look like these mountains are close enough that you can see the tops of the trees. It adds this really nice visual effect because the farthest two mountains look smooth, while this one looks near enough that you can actually see the trees in the shadow. I can see where I didn't get quite enough paint and it is showing through the lighter color. I don't want that, so now that the base has dried, I'm going to add more of this dark color to make sure it looks in deep shadow. Now, you'll notice no reflection on the other side, and that is intentional. Now, this is my other favorite part of this piece. There is ice forming near the coastline. The reason I didn't add that deep, dark, shadowed layer is because I want some of that color from below and the other reflection to mix in with my white, icy, sheening top. It's gonna add this really pretty, reflective surface that looks icy. To do this, we need to water down some pure white, and I'm gonna start by lining a nice edge of this ice, which is what you see in front, and then I'm gonna line the edge of the coastline. These are the 2 points where the ice ends, and the light is going to catch those. Then I'm gonna paint an uneven layer of that pure wet white over the areas in between. Once you've done that, get a clean, damp brush. When I say damp, I don't mean sopping, so dry it off, and then fuss at all of that white. What this is gonna do, it's gonna dilute the bright white and turn it into a grayish, bluish white. The effect is that the reflection of the mountain is still gonna appear like it's hitting that icy surface, but it's not as vivid and more muddled. You just want to scrub across that entire surface and get different gradients of color. You don't want this to look perfectly the same color. Now we can return to that shadowed layer of mountain. We want it peeking out above the ice where it would naturally in the reflection. So on the right side of your page, you're going to have this little bit of that shadowed layer peeking up. Paint the smooth slope in first, and then we're going to come back with our round brush and fuss to make the little tree shapes. Now take a look at your mountains. They're almost done. I noticed the shadow portion on my reflection of the main peak was looking choppy, so I went in with a similar color and smoothed it out. I think it is much more pleasing to the eye now. You can make similar adjustments as you see fit. Now we're going to start playing with pure white. On that icy surface, I want to add a couple more fine lines to define the edges of the ice, both in the water edge and the coastline edge. This makes it more reflective and shimmering. We're even going to add some of these fine lines in the surface of the ice. Let's go ahead and add one more final layer of white. We're going to use pure white straight from the tube. We'll need a little bit of water to make it workable to add highlights on the highest peaks of this mountain. We are going to use this very sparingly because it will overtake all of our shadows very quickly if you go crazy. So just think small amounts on the highest peaks and maybe a couple other peaking locations where maybe there's a jagged strut off the mountain that's catching that light. Don't forget to do this to your reflective mountains as well. Compared to the mountains, my sky feels a little dull, so I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit more white, scrub some rough cloud shapes in there just to brighten it a tiny bit. If you like your sky as is, skip this step. We could call the piece done here, but I'm going to add some thin white horizontal lines to show the light catching on this surface as if there's the slightest breeze causing small ripples on the top of this reflective lake. This is not necessary, and if you like your piece without these, absolutely leave it as is. I like this as a final visual cue that it's a reflection and this is water. And now for my favorite part, let's peel the tape. I really hope that you enjoyed this tutorial as much as I did creating it for you. If you have any suggestions, let me know. And please, like, comment, subscribe, and I'll keep making these.